100 years. In an archaeological context, that's just a blip. In a historical context, it takes more meaning. We do, after all, refer to various centuries as points of reference. This video is designed to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the construction of this building, an event which took place in the 20th century with completion in 1910. For those of us living today, it's interesting to look back and see some of the changes that have taken place since. Perhaps our best understanding is to be gained by an inspection of the 1891 map shown here. Note that on this, most of the commercial establishments that existed then were labeled on the map. Looking at that, we can see that the site occupied by this building was then the Wilhelm Bakery. Whether that bakery was acquired by Hackfeld & Company, who were the original builders, directly from Wilhelm, or whether there were intermediate holders between 1891 and 1910, I'm not sure. But perhaps our best idea of what Hilo at that approximate time looked like is from these old pictures. The Hackfeld Company was started by a sea captain, Heinrich Hackfeld, around 1849 in Honolulu. The original store he set up was a forerunner of what eventually became the Liberty House, now Macy's. Hackfeld had other locations in Hawaii, including one in Kona, also offices on the other islands prior to the construction of this building in 1910. This coconut tree stood slightly north of the intersection of what is now Wainuinui and Kamehameha Avenues. About 16 feet up from the base of the tree, there was a zinc plaque that marked the level of the high water from the 1877 tsunami. For Hackfeld to move their building, or to construct their new building, was necessary for them to continue to operate, which they intended to do by moving their old building, catty-corner, to the location immediately south of the old train station. The coconut tree stood in the way. Now, how to solve that? Clarence Lyman, who was then an agriculturist of some note, suggested that the thing to do was simply to tie a rope to the tree, bend it slightly, and move the building around it. Well, they tried that, but in the process, the tree unfortunately broke. These pictures show the actual construction of the Hackfeld building. Note that most of it was literally pick and shovel work. It's interesting to see what construction techniques looked like then. Now, these pillars that you see right here are in the basement, and you'll still see them if you take a tour of the building today. The rest of it just shows the completion of construction. Construction was done by Harrison and Company. Shown here is a picture of the invitation to the original opening ceremony. This took place in November of 1910, as shown on the copy. Also shown are photos of the opening ceremony, and then some shots of the interior of the building. Hackfeld and his brother-in-law, J.C. Pfluger, became partners in the business, but in 1886, Hackfeld sold out his interest and returned to Germany. The company was a shareholder-owned one, with about 3/4 of its outstanding stock owned by German citizens. With the advent of World War I in 1914, it became increasingly difficult for them to do business. The United States entered the conflict in 1916, and in 1917 it enacted the Trading with the Enemy Act. Under this act, all German-owned assets were expropriated by the U.S. government. They seized the German-owned stock and sold it to a hui of Hawaii businessmen who renamed the company American Factors Ltd., later known as AmFact. What did Hilo look like in the era immediately following construction of this building? Here are some pictures that show you some of the buildings and what was happening. Some interesting things occurred to change things in Hilo in the decades following 1910. For one thing, the streets got renamed. Here's an excerpt of the ordinance by which the name of the streets were changed from existing to Hawaiian names. As an example, Bridge Street shall be known as Keawe Street. Pittman Street shall be known as Kinooli Street. Reed Street shall be known as Kaialani. Richardson Street shall be known as Mamo Street. Here are some other pictures of various buildings in town. Of course, there's the Hackfeld building. This is the Moheo Park bandstand, then 2 stories. Here's more of Cam Avenue with a parade going by. A very well-known bell player visited Hilo. Here's Honolulu Park, the site of our racetrack. Some aerial views of Hilo in 1923. And that shows the same location of the building. There is Kalakaua Park. Here's the Hilo Theater, one of the newer buildings in town, and First Hawaiian Bank, which also was one of the newer buildings in town. Here you see the Crest Building. The clock on the right is the so-called Doc Hill clock. More on that a little later. The Hill Optical Company, owned by W.H. Hill, was located about where basically Books is now. My father, Fred W. Koehnen Fritz to most people, immigrated from Germany to Hilo to work for Hackfeld at the beginning of 1909. His father was the managing director of the company in Bremen, Germany, and he sent his son to fill a job vacancy here in Hilo. He was working for them when this building was built and was part of their staff when they moved in. While he had applied for citizenship at the time that Hackfeld was expropriated in 1916, he had not yet become naturalized, and his employment was consequently terminated coincident with that event. A bookkeeper-accountant by profession, he thereupon started his own bookkeeping service, with such recognizable names as P.C. Beamer and W.H. Hill among his clientele. He found himself devoting more and more time to Hill Optical, and in 1929 purchased the business, renaming it f.koehnen Ltd. Optical goods were eliminated. More jewelry, silverware, china, and giftware were added. The business operated in that location right up through World War II. After the war, my sister Haley's husband, Carl E. Roner, Fritz's son-in-law, joined the business and opened a furniture division, utilizing next-door space that was previously occupied by the American bakery. Here's an idea of what it looked like. Meanwhile, Doc Hill went on to many other endeavors. He became one of Hilo's leading entrepreneurs, as well as one of the longest-serving politicians in the state legislature. In 1946, the entire face of downtown Hilo was completely changed by the devastating tsunami that hit on April Fool's Day. An earthquake off the Alaska Deep sent a monstrous wave that essentially wiped out the entire row of buildings that fronted Cam Avenue between it and the ocean, including the railroad that ran along the ocean side of those buildings. Most of these photos, most of which came from the Tsunami Museum, show some of the destruction. This particular photo here shows the location of f.koehnen Ltd. at that time. These others are merely scenic views of some of the absolutely incredible destruction that occurred. Here are some pictures of the era after the tidal wave, 1950-1960. New Bayfront Highway was put in over the old railroad route. This shows the thing not yet completed. It had portions of what the Bayfront was. This is a color picture postcard of the era. The 46 wave also destroyed the Amtrak lumber yard as well as the Davies and HPM yards, which were located along and Mackay of Cam Avenue. The folly of trying to rebuild in the same locations was not lost on those businesses, and Amtrak then relocated to an area mark of what is now Waikea Plaza in the general area of where Kia Motors is presently situated. By that time, Amtrak had also phased out many of the merchandise categories that they previously stocked. So they consolidated almost all of their operations at the new location, leaving this building empty for several years, save for one insurance office in the downstairs Mauka corner along Wainuinui Avenue, and an appliance showroom on another part of the ground floor. f.koehnen Ltd. acquired the building from Amtrak in 1957, did extensive renovation, and moved their retail operation from the previous location to here. The ground floor was devoted to their jewelry and giftware divisions, and the upstairs later became the foundation of their furniture operation. It should be mentioned that the move was not without its own unfortunate occurrence, a major flooding that hit 1 week prior to the grand opening. A major rainstorm, centered primarily over Amaulu, sent water cascading down that road, then via Wainaku Avenue and over the Wailuku bridges, which unfortunately then had no drains, to collect in a large lake at the foot of Shipman Street and Cam Avenue. That lake, which was probably over 3 feet high at its center, overlapped the sidewalk, entered the building through sidewalk freight openings, and partially filled the building basement. Now here's a few shots of the devastation it caused. In spite of that terrific flood, only a week before our opening, through the terrific efforts of family, employees, and friends, we were able to open on schedule. Some of the scenes of that happy day are depicted in some of these pictures that follow. There's the opening crowd. There's my father untying the maililei. There's me, as a very young person, glad-handing people as they came through the door. Some scenes of the interior of the building. As you can see, it was primarily jewelry on the ground floor, and the furniture was all upstairs. One of the things that's interesting in this is the way people dressed at that time. You'll notice that it was a good deal more formal than it is today. Shirts, ties, coats sometimes, and the women all wore nice dresses. This showed staff that existed at the time we opened at that location. my sister, and my brother-in-law. The old furniture delivery van, one of many, many varieties that we've had. We did suffer another blow with the 1960 tsunami. While the building stood intact, the front door was sprung by the wave, and there was a flooding on the ground floor and in the basement. While we did suffer some loss of merchandise, other parts of Hilo were far less fortunate, particularly areas towards the Puna end of town. These were largely areas that they thought were safe because of not having been hit in the 46 tsunami. Some of these pictures that you've see are the aftermath of that wave. We had almost 40 years of no floods, no tsunamis, what have you. But with increased competition and declining business in the jewelry operation, Koehnen Ltd. closed out that department in order to devote more space and concentrate on the furniture operation. Almost concurrently, it organized a new and separate entity, Koehnen's Inc., doing business as Koehnen's Interiors, to encompass the retail operations, leaving the real property function under F. Koehnen Ltd. In the 1970s, there were additional retail locations opened in Kona and Waimea, but these were later closed in the economic downturn of the early 80s. Kona reopened in a new and better location in the 90s, but the current economic downturn resulted in closing that operation at the end of last year. Meantime, in 2000, all of Hilo suffered some damage with a major flood. These pictures show various scenes around town during that 2000 flood. It was pretty severe. We go on to show a few pictures. The building here was flooded, and we show some pictures of merchandise damage, cleanup, what have you. All in all, it was almost equivalent to being hit with another tsunami. Just earlier this year, we all dodged another bullet. The previous pictures have shown what happened during tsunamis and floods. We had warning of one not too long ago, and these are some pictures of the preparations that we took in trying to prevent further damage. First, we got up, the building was boarded up. We cleaned out the entire ground floor. That's what it looked like after it was boarded. Then we all went out to watch, not knowing what was going to happen. Fortunately, there was only a 3-foot surge to contend with. However, there was an offshoot. We made the national news.
Part of the story, of course, is also the tsunami unleashed by this massive earthquake. It threatened parts of the U.S. West Coast and Hawaii, where there was even greater concern. Lisa Fletcher tonight on that.
As the tsunami raced across the Pacific, those in Hawaii's coastal danger zones retreated to higher ground.
I have a bad feeling. We're overdue. It's a big quake.
The first wave hit Hilo as our producer Lee Valchik watched. It covered an abandoned island.
First wave covered Coconut Island, and I just heard someone yell out, "Wave."
Tourists took refuge on the upper floors of hotels, and police evacuated most threatened areas like downtown Hilo on the east coast of the Big Island. These buoys, connected to sensors at the bottom of the ocean, send early tsunami warning signals via satellite. Scientists say the system worked as it should, giving people time to prepare. Grocery stores and gas stations were nearly tapped out as people stocked up.
I mean, if they see the sirens are coming, then there's something we gotta move, you know.
2 tsunamis reached Hawaii's shore with deadly force in the last half-century. In 1946, a tsunami triggered by an 8.6 earthquake off the coast of Alaska killed 159 people, and destroyed Hilo's waterfront. 14 years later, another tsunami, this one caused by the largest quake on record, also in Chile, at 9.5. It killed 61 people in Hawaii and destroyed 500 homes. Today, the buildings are stronger, the warning system's better, but nobody's waving off the danger, which can last for hours after the first tsunami waves hit.
The wooden walls of defense are coming down. Less than 24 hours after a tsunami scare in Hilo, Hawaii, businesses are opening back up in a town with great history of disaster.
It is a relief, it didn't get damaged or anything, so I'm stoked about that. Where does this one go?
Moving has never been this enjoyable before for the Koehnen family. 86-year-old Fred Koehnen and his 88-year-old sister Haley Rohner are the living legacy of Koehner Interiors. Both the family and the business have survived more than one tsunami, and memories of 1960 are still rolling in their minds.
And we could hear the wave coming in, and it sounded like a freight train, and we saw our power plant blow up, which is right down here on the water's edge.
Having been through it before, cleaning up after something like that is a real mess. Everything is waterlogged. You've got mud all over. We even had fish in the store.
Hilo bore the brunt of two major tsunamis in the 1900s. In 1960, a series of 8 separate waves reached as high as 35 feet in the bay. And on April 1st, 1946, a 45-foot tall wall of water killed 159 people.
Having happened on April the 1st, everyone thought it was an April Fool's joke, until my husband got in the car and came down and called home and said, this is no joke, Hilo has been destroyed.
During that 1946 disaster, there was no warning system. Now, tsunami warnings create frantic preparation work, giving people like the Koehnens a chance to keep the 80-year-old family business open. Mark Carlson, The Associated Press, Hilo, Hawaii.
So, that brings us up to the present, both as to the building and to the business. I think we can say, in all modesty, that both have come a long ways. There's never absolute certainty as to the future, but both the building and the business have withstood 2 very powerful tsunamis, several floods, as well as business downturns over the years of their existence. The building remains one of the more historic physical landmarks in the downtown area, and hopefully the business enjoys its own unique Koehnen reputation. We face the present century with a feeling of thanks for what the past has given us, and an always optimistic outlook for the future.